President Donald Trump has promised to cut regulations. But what does that mean exactly? Here to explain is Jeff Brabant, a legal expert at the National Federation of Independent Businesses. Jeff, if I've heard cut regulations once, I've heard it 1,000 times. Politicians always talk about it. But what does it mean specifically? So I'm going to hand it to you. What are small businesses asking for as Trump comes in, this new administration? What does cutting regulations specifically look like, and how does it impact the average small business owner, the average taxpayer?
Thanks, Casey. I work with the National Federation of Independent Business. We represent about 300,000 small businesses around the country, and our average member has about 7 to 8 employees. So we're talking about real mom and pop small businesses, the smallest of the small. And the one thing to keep in mind with small businesses and regulations is that if you only have a handful of employees, you don't have a compliance department, you don't have attorneys on staff, you don't have accountants on staff to deal with regulations, to research regulations, to understand regulations, and to make sure you're compliant. You're doing it yourself, and you're taking time away from your business to do it yourself. And you're doing it as well as you can, but inevitably, you're probably going to make some mistakes. So one thing, that's the first thing I think policymakers need to understand in terms of regulations for small business owners. The second thing is that just because you're adding a new minor, small regulation, you don't think it's a big deal. Oh, it's just another hour a year. They do that several times a year, every year, forever. And they do it at the federal level, and they do it at the state level, and they do it at the local level. And when you're a small business owner handling compliance yourself, that really adds up. So when small business owners see President Trump come in and say, all right, we're going to roll this back, I think immediately they could take a deep breath because they say, okay, at least it won't be death by 1,000 cuts again. At least they're going to think about this and not just roll out regulation after regulation after regulation without concern of the impact on small business owners. So in the past, President Trump has rolled out 1 in, 2 out, meaning if there is a new regulation, they're getting rid of some old ones. I think that's a great idea. So we hope that he does more of that, ensuring that, if you do have to pass new regulations, that you get rid of old ones, and so that the total cost of regulation goes down for small business owners.
Sure. And so, one that there's been reporting on, talk about at the federal level, has been this beneficial ownership rule that requires a lot of reporting for small businesses. This one really caught my attention because it goes to your point about all this paperwork and things. I've studied, at the academic level, economics, and what we learned there is that actually large established companies like regulations because it's easy for them to handle it. They can just pass it on to the the 17th floor, which handles all these things, and it's marginal to them, but it puts their competitors out of business. The small mom and pop places, they can't handle it. It's an outsized burden on them. So the more regulations actually benefits larger companies sometimes because it puts their competition out of business and they can absorb the impact. Do you think that's true? And can you tell us what's going on with this beneficial ownership rule?
Yeah, and in terms of the large companies benefiting this, we've seen examples of that in the past. That's happened in Congress. If you go back 7 or 8 years, there was a certain big business, Amazon, we're all familiar with, decided to support $15 minimum wage. Usually when you look at minimum wage, it tends to be more difficult for smaller businesses to be able to increase wages and benefits at the same scale of larger businesses. If you don't have economies of scale and you have smaller profit margins, it's harder to provide increased pay and benefits. So we've seen this in the past from larger businesses supporting certain regulations because, frankly, they have a detrimental impact on smaller businesses. In terms of the beneficial ownership information reporting, luckily, as of today, there's a pause on that. It's a temporary pause until the courts figure out if this thing is constitutional. But for those in your audience who aren't aware of this thing, Casey, this is one of, in our opinion, one of the more egregious regulations to come out in recent memory. If you have a business with 20 or fewer employees and less than $5 million in revenue, you're going to have to report the beneficial ownership information. That's anyone with a 25% stake in your company, along with anyone with substantial control of your company. So if you own a restaurant manager has to report. And you're going to have to report their driver's license and any of their personal information to the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. And you're going to have to do that. And if you don't do that, you can go to jail for 2 years. And if any of that information changes, you have 30 days to update it. So if you own a restaurant and your manager changes, you got to report to FinCEN within 30 days that happened, or you can get fined up to $10,000 and go to jail for 2 years. So, and this only applies to small businesses. This is something that they implement and say, well, this is how we're going to get rid of shell companies and money laundering, because money launderers create shell companies to hide who owns it, and these are bad guys. One of our concerns is they're estimating 32 million small businesses are going to have to comply with this in year one. So the question you got to ask yourself is, well, that's costing billions upon billions of dollars from a compliance perspective. Is that worth potentially catching these people? And let's be frank, are you going to catch a sophisticated money launderer? Are they going to tell the government, hey, here's my shell company, I'm laundering money through it, please come and catch me? So that's one of our concerns is, what is the cost benefit on this? When we're looking at a $77 billion is what the cost of this regulation is over 10 years. So what is that going to cost for small businesses? And it's a real concern for our members, and we're hoping to get it overturned in courts.
That's interesting. It hits on a theme that we've actually discussed on this show before, where at the federal level, they turn to regulation instead of enforcement. Instead of just beefing up enforcement of the regulations that are already on the books and might solve the problem, they pass more regulations because the enforcement is not doing well for whatever reason, and there's still a problem, and so they pass more laws. We saw that with the border, for instance. Democrats were pushing for new border restrictions, but all it really took when Trump came in office was just deploying more officers to enforce the law in the books. We've seen that in much smaller regulations. I just had a guest on talking about the vaping market and this push for regulations, but a lot of the laws are on the books, so they just enforce them. I wonder if that's the case here with the money laundering and requiring the entire nation of small businesses to start reporting more to marginally help out the law enforcement investigators, I guess, at the FBI, who are supposed to be looking into this. Seems odd. It's also essentially creating a registry of entrepreneurs, which is interesting. So we have that. It seems like it's paused, which will be good news to a lot of small business owners. I want to ask you also here about the PRO Act. Is an interesting thing that pushed during the Biden administration to basically make it illegal for people to be contractors. I mean, if you want to start freelance writing for a blog for someone and making a little side income, that would have basically been illegal under the PRO Act. If you want to start a gardening business where you just part-time get paid as an independent contractor to help out a couple of neighbors, that would have been illegal. And so I think there's this question of workers' rights and small businesses who really need some of these independent contractors. What do you see as the future of the push to banning independent contractors under the Trump administration? Yeah,
we hope that the PRO Act will continue to be blocked in Congress. Your points on independent contractors were great, because the interesting thing about the PRO Act, that has this ABC test, meaning you have to pass test A, test B, and test C in order to be classified as an independent contractor rather than a W-2 wage employee. This was created in California originally, and this was created because certain unions wanted to be able to unionize Uber drivers. And Uber later got a carve-out and weren't subjected to it. Who ended up being subjected to it? Small business owners who didn't get a carve-out because there's too many industries to carve out. The person who owns a restaurant who has a live gig, who pays someone a few $100 to play at their restaurant at night, now that's a wage employee. That's not a contractor anymore. So all these gig employees, all these small businesses who are not the target of the legislation are collateral damage. And it's a real concern for the small business economy, and one of the more egregious provisions of the PRO Act that we hope Congress puts a stop to.
Well, thanks for coming on. I think we're in an entirely new world for small businesses and regulation for the next few years. We're going to be following it closely. Thanks for your help. Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks for having me on.